Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 5 of our NENA Narratives Week, our Narratives Fiesta. It's been a terrific week, and we're really excited today to be joined by Natasha and Pete, the digital storytellers and story makers. Very excited. And I also want to acknowledge my co-host and co-conspirator, Chris Reedy. I've pinned the 4 of us for now while we do our hellos and our introductions. But I'd like to I'll start up a few slides and do a proper acknowledgement of country. And as always, if you'd like to note down where you're from and whose country you're on, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. If you do hear any serious hacking coughs in the background, I apologize. It's my beautiful daughter who's well, but not well. Okay, the joys of working from home. Children, dogs, cats, it's all happening. So as I said, welcome to NENA Narratives Week. It's been an epic week, and we've had a lot of terrific feedback from people across many different sectors saying they've really enjoyed the learning and the sharing, and I couldn't agree more. I'm part of NENA's Narratives Hub, but have learnt so much this week, so I'm grateful to our speakers today and everyone who shared with us throughout the week. Just want to acknowledge country. I live, work and play on the traditional lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people here in beautiful North Brisbane, Australia. I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the remarkable civilizational culture and governance system that has cared for country and cared for one another since time immemorial. This Aboriginal Australia map gives an indication of the language groups across the continent from a very, very, very long time ago right through to today. It's a nice moment to reflect on the ongoing legacy of colonisation and the debt that we owe to the Indigenous peoples, the First Nations peoples of this continent. And in terms of the New Economy Network, we cannot have conversations about a better future, a better economy, a different economic system without acknowledging the huge success story that is the steady state economic system of Indigenous Australians. And so we have people like Mary Graham, Ross Williams in our NENA Indigenous Hub. And I see that Alana Marsh, one of our guest speakers on Monday, is joining us today. We are nothing without our solidarity and learnings from Indigenous friends and colleagues, and their input into NENA has been invaluable. So I invite you all to take a moment to contemplate whose land you're on, the debt that we owe, and the work that you do, perhaps contributing back to working in solidarity with our Indigenous friends and colleagues. Now, I'm sure that everyone on this group knows who NENA is, but in terms of a quick overview for anyone watching the recording, perhaps, the New Economy Network was built between 2016 and 2017. It started to emerge. It's a growing network of individuals and civil society organisations who are working to transform our broader society by shifting the economic system. We want an economic system that supports people and planet, that ensures that ecological health and social and economic justice are the foundations, the principles and the goals of any kind of economic system in Australia. NENA, as I mentioned, it was born out of a conference Bronwyn Morgan and I hosted in 2016. And then there were 2 years of online and in-person meetings, conferences, discussion groups as we built our governance. And really, primarily, if you had to nail what NENA is all about, it's about trying to amplify all of our voices to say what we want from a different economic system. We deliberately chose the word new economy as a framing that's kind of vague, because we're not locked into one way forward. We know that the solution to the crises across our planet and our ecological systems and our social justice problems is because of a big monolithic economic system called neoliberalism. But the solution is not another big monolithic system. It's diversity, it's localization. It's all of the things that fit, I think, into our founding principles: ecological health, place-based, localized, participatory, and far more democratic systems, and of course working in solidarity with First Nations people and their sovereignty. So that's a short introduction to things that NENA believes is important. Please do visit our website if you're not familiar with NENA's work. We've got a lot of terrific activities, events and people in our network, just ready to connect and to share. So we're at the end of NENA Narratives Week. So the NENA Narratives Hub has been working for quite some time, really thinking about how can we contribute into different stories in our society that tell a much more vibrant, diverse, socially just and ecologically centered story about the economy. On Monday, we looked at why narratives matter. On Tuesday, we looked at some really powerful discussions and interactive activities about how we communicate and how we think about a vision for a future. On Wednesday, we had our very own NENA Grew and Transfer, where we picked apart some advertising and adverts for different ways of, I guess, communicating about business, communicating about a future. And it was a really good session. Last night, Johanna and Fiona and others hosted the People Need People warm data session, which was heaps fun and really informative. And today, definitely not last, but definitely not least, I'm really looking forward to this session with Natasha and Pete, where we're going to be looking at how we can all become new economy storytellers. What tools can we use, and how do we do stuff? How do we contribute ourselves? So I think that was all I had to say. Yeah, oh, that was yesterday's webinar. Thank you. For anyone who doesn't know our website, please do look us up. And if you've got any questions, you want to connect, join a hub, share your expertise into the NENA Narratives Hub, because we'll probably start planning our next set of activities in the next few months, please get in touch. Chris, I don't know if you've got any other comments you'd like to add to welcome to folks as we kick off.
One tiny comment, which is that when we were planning this week, I very quickly thought of Digital Storytellers as a great organisation to invite along. I did their online storytelling course a few years back, and it was quite important to me in sort of the shift that I've taken towards working with narratives and how to transform narratives, and some really tangible ways of doing that. So I'm really delighted to have Natasha and Pete here today. I think there's a lot that we can do together both today and hopefully moving into the future to share the stories of not just NENA's network, but other networks that are working towards similar goals, such as the regenerating networks in the different capital cities and many others that we're all involved with. So I think this is great, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you, Chris. So am I. Okay, so Chris and I are going to turn off now and become part of the audience. We're here if you need us. Over to you, Natasha and Pete. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Michelle and Chris. It's great to be here with everybody today. I've really enjoyed the sessions throughout this week and been really inspired. So yeah, it's kind of given us a lot of inspiration into kind of how to think about today and a little insight into some of the stories that you might be telling. But we look forward to kind of hearing a bit more about those today. So today's session is really about asking you the question of what story do you want to tell about a better future, and how can you actually start to do that using some of the tools that we will be going through today, and would love to hear from you if you have tools that you're already using that you'd like to share with the group as well. I do want to echo Michelle's acknowledgement of the traditional custodians of the land on which you may be tuning in from. For me here, that is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I think particularly as we are talking about storytelling this week, I want to acknowledge that storytelling has existed on this continent since time immemorial, and that it is the home to the richest, most advanced, most longest lasting storytelling culture in the world, and that we continue to listen to that and acknowledge those stories first and foremost. So I am joined here today by my colleague Pete. We are part of the team from Digital Storytellers. At the heart of Digital Storytellers, essentially we are an organisation that believes in the power of using storytelling to create a better future. We work with organisations and communities and people to help them figuring out what that narrative is that they want to share with the world. We do a lot of work in the film space in turning those narratives into film pieces. But the part that I get really excited about and which I spend most of my time in is the side of things where we run workshops and programs, which is all about not us telling the stories, but seeing what the stories are that everybody else has to tell. And particularly these days using these things, our smartphones, which, you know, can film in 4K, and there's, you know, films at Cannes Film Festival that are filmed on these things. I really do believe it's such a powerful opportunity for diverse and multi-narratives to come through in a beautiful fabric that makes up a greater narrative. My background into coming into storytelling, I always talk about storytelling and then I forget to tell my story. So I do really need to take a moment to do that. My fascination with kind of media and storytelling started at a pretty young age. I was 10 years old when September 11 happened, and coming from a Muslim family, I really saw the way that the narrative in the media around the Islamic community changed, and the way that had a tangible impact on the way that people from the wider world engaged with that community. And so I started to ask these questions about who was telling these stories in the media that didn't align with what my experience of that community was. Why were they telling these stories, and what agenda did they have in actually sharing those stories? So as a 10-year-old, that became a bit of a fascination for me, which then led me to go on and study media at university with the idea that I thought I would be like the mole, maybe working at the Today Show or something like that, that I could change the system from the inside out. That was my plan, that, you know, I'd be, you know, the change from within. But when I was at university, I was lucky enough to do an internship in Bhutan, which I'm sure many of you know is a country that measures gross national happiness. And at the time that I went and did my internship at a newspaper over there, they had, you know, recently transitioned to democracy, and were asking these questions of their media of how do we be a media that facilitates gross national happiness and a vibrant democratic discussion in this country. So that was just so eye-opening for me, to have these conversations be so present and active, and really see that the way that the newspaper, the Bhutan Observer that I was at, was really asking these questions of themselves every day as they, you know, told these stories. Now, of course, after that, I came back home and started looking for a job in the mainstream media in Australia, and thought to myself, I just can't do this after being over there. I really want to continue, you know, doing the work that I was inspired by in Bhutan, and thinking about how can I use the media and storytelling to contribute to the kind of future that I want to see in the world. Which led me to work in the space of crowdfunding with social and environmental impact projects, which then led me to see the power of digital storytelling in this world as a tool for really engaging broadly, really having different narratives told, which has led me to the work that I now do with Digital Storytellers. But I'd like to hand it over to Pete to do a quick introduction, because Pete's going to be helping us through the session today as well.
Thanks, Tash, and thanks everyone for being here. And I'll just acknowledge that I'm here on beautiful Bundjalung country today. And yeah, my background in storytelling is more about having an environmental lens on things, and growing up in a really beautiful place that was being constantly threatened. And I could see the way the narrative was feeding into the way that was all happening and unfolding. And that really got me interested in, you know, how can we democratize the narrative? How can we share the power of story amongst each other through not just storytelling, but listening to stories and then weaving our own narratives together? And, you know, that's led me through here. This is like the COP25 conference. So looking at how big environmental narratives weave right down to the grassroots, the ground level. And that connects I guess, with my NENA story as well. Having worked in transition towns for a decade or so, and then doing regenerative farming with the Friendly Farms project that I'm on, and currently with, and then Sydney Commons Lab and Regen Sydney, co-convening that at the moment. And I'm just really delighted to see everyone here from the NENA community to lean into the story. You know, how can we democratize this, the narratives? And yeah, we just hear each other's stories and create something much better, I think, than a narrative that's been handed to us, and leave the world with a much better narrative on the way through. So thanks. I'll pass back to Tash to continue.
Thanks, Pete. So I guess to give us a bit of a sense of what kind of stories that you want to tell, and what you hope to get out of today's session, I'd love if in the chat you could share, who you are, whatever that question means to you, where you're tuning in from today, and what kind of stories do you want to be telling about this new economy and the future. Love to learn a little bit more about you in the chat through that. What kind of stories do you want to be telling? And also, is there anything in particular you want to get out of today's session that we can hopefully then weave through if it's not incorporated already? So let you take a moment to do that. Yes, just a small question to start the day off with. Yeah, anything that comes to mind, whether it's something that you yourself are working on, whether it's an idea, whether it's a value or a feeling that you want to convey through the stories that you tell. So I'll leave you to, so we've got joy and connection. Wonderful. Yes, that definitely love to see more stories of that. Okay, I'll let you keep chipping away at that. So in terms of what we've got planned here, but as I said, if there's anything in particular you do want to hit on in this session, please do let us know. We're going to be looking at the power of digital storytelling. It's been so wonderful to hear this week, everybody kind of touch on the power of narrative and the power of story and the importance of that in building a better future. We are going to go into some particular skills around digital storytelling and some ways that you can be doing that with the tools that you might already have at your fingertips. We are going to look at how you think about story ideas and planning stories and thinking about, how can we engage people to action or invite people into new ideas by planning our stories. And I do want to frame this session with the fact that, traditionally in the media and traditionally through digital stories and filmmakings, ethics hasn't always been a big question there. But I think that if we want to be new economy storytellers, we really have to be embodying the values that we want to see in the world through the way that we actually do our stories and not just in the outcome of the pieces that we create. So inviting the question of how can we be ethical, human-centered storytellers with ethics and the right process at the center of that. So in terms of why storytelling, I will keep this brief because I know it's been touched on a lot through this week, but this is what our brain looks like when we're digesting facts and data and information. These areas and these synapses are firing off, Broca's area and Wernicke's area. But the way that the human is made, when we are engaging with information that is put in a time and a place, when there is sensory information involved, when there is emotion, neurologically, we are more engaged with that. We're more likely to retain it. We're more likely to share it with others. It's more likely to shift our whole being and shift the way that we are in the world. And so storytelling, essentially, it's almost like this superpower. But I think we can all recognize that, perhaps over the past couple of 100 years, that superpower hasn't always led to great things. We watched some stories the other day in the Gruen transfer session of the way that, powerful storytelling is possibly used for not such great means. So I think it's really up to us who can see a better future, who do believe that there is a better way is possible and who believe in justice, to be telling the stories and sharing the visions of the future world that we can see, to inspire others to be able to see that and feel that and tangibly touch that and work towards it. And just to give a little bit more on that, I do want to share a little bit more about how digital storytellers see story. And obviously the way that we feel most comfortable doing that is through video. So I'm just going to play a quick video. For those of you who it might buffer for, we will provide links with the slides afterwards as well.
The stories we tell ourselves become the lens through which we see our world. The stories we tell each other become the voice through which we speak our truth. The stories we tell the world become the hope through which we make our future. So, What stories are you telling to make a difference? We live in a moment where technology has shifted and placed the power of story in our own hands. Now we can find, make, and share our own stories for impact. Together, we can disrupt the status quo, show what's possible, and reach the tipping point of movements. We can change the narrative and change the world. We are all storytellers. What story will you tell?
So in terms of storytelling and why digital storytelling, I think that what excites me about digital storytelling is that it does have the ability to transcend the barriers of geography and time. We can tell stories, in one part of the world that reach another part of the world. Obviously through 2020 and 2021, we saw, the power and sometimes limitation of digital to connect people across time. It can merge the past, present, and future as well. When we have the ability through the magic of editing that we will touch a little bit on today, to bring voices in from the past, from the present, and from the future. Just the power of that to speak in a non-linear way and to challenge the existing narratives out there is so powerful. The other thing I really love about, video in particular is the ability to bring together the head, heart, and hands of story. We're not limited to just, words on a page. We are creatures that understand so much through the power of visuals, through the power of body language, through tone of voice, through things that really go beyond written language. And music and the ability of feeling to and so the ability of digital stories to do that, I think, is just so powerful. There is also this increasing accessibility, as we talked about before. Obviously it's not universal yet, and there are still lots of barriers to access, but in terms of the difference between 10 years ago needing to have access to a huge, giant, expensive camera that I definitely wouldn't have been able to carry, to these days something that is often carried in the palm of our hands every day with our smartphones. It's just such a shift in who gets to tell these stories. And we live in this world where multi-narratives can coexist with all these different little threads of stories. But I guess the question then is, how do we start to connect those and actually weave a tapestry that's not always polarized and not always disconnected, and have the ability for those to coexist. So yeah, we will get into the tools now, but I do want to frame all of this with that question of how can we create a process or embody a process of storytelling that is living the values that we want to see in the world, that isn't extractive storytelling, that does put those who own the stories at the center of the agency of telling those stories, that asks the question of whose stories are these to tell and gives space for those people to tell those stories. And that is not just about storytelling, but perhaps also about story listening and creating space for stories to be heard. So I'll leave that question as we get into more of the tools. So we do want to start off with, the question of actually finding your story. A lot of people think when it comes to digital storytelling that it's all about, picking up the camera and pressing record. But for us, so much of the process is thinking about what is the thread of the many threads of story that we could tell. And there's a tool that we use to do that, which I'm actually going to hand over to Pete to talk us, to introduce, being the brainchild of Pete.
Thanks, Tash. The story canvas might look familiar to those of you who've worked with the business model canvas, because essentially we've remapped it for storytelling. It's a Creative Commons. We've got it open and hackable. So it's one of those open source tools that you can make your own. And what we've done is tried to short circuit a lot of the time it takes to brainstorm and diverge your thinking to come up with all of the elements that are required to bake a story. And you'll find all of those here on the story canvas, ranging from why are we telling the story and the purpose to the outcomes. Where are we trying to go, because this is about, for us, making change, positive change in the world using the power of story. So we want to know what sort of change, how are things now, how would we like to see them in the future, who are we looking to connect with in terms of our audience, where are they on their journey, how can we help them and help facilitate that journey a little bit more, where are we reaching them, what do things look like, how does it feel when we embody the story, and all of those things, elements come together in the center of the story canvas, where we put in what we call an ideal narrative. How do we see the story unfolding? And the funny thing about storytelling is, once you do have a narrative and you set off to start telling a story, the story tends to take a life of its own, and the story starts weaving you into it. And it's like a feedback loop. And, you know, when we have a story, for me, the power of story, the transformational power, is about a story that wants to be told, wants to be heard, wants to be come forth from our own being, and bringing that together with others. It sort of breaks a loop. It changes a loop into a feedback, like a closed loop into an open circuit, and then that creates a feedback loop, and the story becomes alive, takes you on a journey, and we widen our lens, and that's the beauty of the whole thing. So the story canvas is designed to short circuit all of the time that it might take to come up with all of those things, and you can do it very quickly. Everything's designed, that all of our tools are designed to do over a cuppa. And that's a big cuppa, but you could even have a small cuppa and get a story canvas done. So that would be my background on the story canvas and why it exists. And it's a free tool that you can download from our website. And as we said, it's open source, hackable, make it your own, have fun with it.
Awesome. Thanks, Pete. Yeah, if you want to drop the link in the chat, Pete, there's an online version of the story canvas that you can kind of use. It's got prompts to work through as you kind of put together a story idea. And what I've loved seeing in the workshops when we use this, and it's definitely something that I can relate to, is often we can have this anxiety around, like, what is the story that I want to tell? And, you know, I imagine these, you know, these storyboards and these scripts and things like that, and it feels just really intimidating to me. Whereas if I just tell myself, you know, I'm just going to put a timer on for 10 minutes, I'm going to get some ideas down on this story canvas, I'm going to have a sense of whether they actually work together, do these people and places actually embody the key messages that I want to share through this story? Is the audience I'm trying to have a conversation with actually interested in these key messages, or is this just what I want to say and not thinking about who am I trying to talk to? I can get a sense of that before actually then going further into my storytelling. And it's so much easier to do that when you've got something down on a page versus when all those ideas are just swimming around in your head. So definitely encourage you to, if you've got a story idea that you want to work on, I would say as we kind of go through each of these sections, think about what that story is. Maybe make some notes down in a notebook or in the notes app on your computer, and really think about what would you put down for each of these sections. So yeah, if you had your story idea earlier, I just checked some of them out in the chat. Really start to workshop that as we go through each of these sections. And please, I do invite you to share any questions, any thoughts you have as we go through this in the chat. Pete will be keeping an eye in there, and we'll hopefully crash, tackle, interrupt me if there's something that comes up that you'd like to address there, and then I'd really invite that. So starting at the top with purpose. Now, I believe it was Eleanor also touched on this the other day in the session. This is really about asking the question of, why did this story need to be told? And asking that question 5 times so that you're really diving into what are the actual values that underpin this story. Is it about justice? Is it about family? Is it about connection? Is it about human potential? Is it about equity? Because when you can start to tap into what those values are and bring those to life in your storytelling, whether explicitly or implicitly, that is really when you are going to have powerful stories that reach people here and not just here. We always talk about this idea of needing to touch the heart to shift the mind, and then the hands will take action. And so really tapping into the purpose of your story, the values that underpinned it, is about touching the heart. Now, I want to show an example of this through a really wonderful story that is from a First Nation social enterprise called SOBA. who we worked with a couple of years ago. And I just think that they do such a great job of sharing the why behind what they do when they share their story. So I'll just play that.
After I'd had a big night drinking, I was laying in the bed hungover. My boy rattled his little finger in my face and he just went, "Dad, can you stop drinking silly drink?" That was the last time I ever touched alcohol. So Sober came about as part of my ongoing live journey. We produce non-alcoholic craft beer to raise independent funds to work in the drug and alcohol and mental health space, particularly with at-risk youth. We're uniquely Australian. We're an Aboriginal owned and managed business and all our products are infused with different native fruits, spices or botanicals. For us to all live on this planet, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander enterprises can be innovators and leaders by turning back and working our ways.
So obviously a super short story there. Be interested if you have any thoughts, please do share them in the chat. But what I love about the way Clinton shares his story there is, we can connect in with this idea of, it's about, he started off with that personal story of his family and the why behind what he does. He didn't spend the whole time talking about the what or the how. He did touch on that, but then he also did give us this vision for the future that he sees with First Nations enterprises leading and innovating. So it connects us in with this bigger picture of who he is and why they do what they do. So yeah, would love to hear any thoughts that you have on that in the chat. Yeah, we'll definitely share the links to these afterwards as well. And so yeah, just as, I'm sure many of you have seen the Simon Sinek Golden Circle, but he always talks about the most powerful storytellers don't just talk about what they do or how they do it, it's the why behind what they do as well. So just kind of summarizing that aspect there. Now, audience, this is a question that we always ask the communities and organizations that we are working with. And I'm sure many of you can guess when we ask, who do you want this story to reach? What many people's responses is. And I'll be like, everybody, we want this story to go viral. We want everyone in the world to see it. But I think actually what we need to recognize is that we are never, logistically, or we're never really talking to everybody with the stories that we tell. There is always a context to the audiences that we're reaching, whether that context is geographic, whether it is demographic, or whether it is even the journey that they're currently on with the issue or story that you're trying to tell. It's going to be a very different story that we tell to an audience that perhaps is unaware of or apathetic about regenerative agricultural practices versus the story that we might tell to those who are already engaged with that. And we want those people to become champions or ambassadors of that story. We really need to meet our audience or our community that we're talking with where they're at and not just say what we want to say about an issue and really think about it through the audience's lens, especially when it comes to digital storytelling. We all know that in terms of attention spans these days in the digital interface, those are often limited. So if we can think about where is our audience at in the journey and where do we want to meet them, it makes the other decisions that we make around what's included and excluded in our story so much more realistic and easy to make. And again, I just want to hone in on that point of, when we think our story is universal, that is actually putting a lens on what universality is. We are automatically, unconsciously determining who is and isn't part of that universal idea when we decide our story is for everyone. So really encourage you to be realistic around who you're talking to when you are telling your stories. Which then leads me to key messages. I won't say much more on this apart from, the less you say, often that is the more you say. If we think about that story we just watched of Sober and Clinton, essentially there were 3 messages in that and nothing more. So yeah, really hone it in to what does my audience already know? What would they be interested in or compelled by? And this is obviously, like Pete said, always going to be a feedback loop. If we don't know these questions about our audience, why don't we know them? We need to start the conversation there and be listening to the responses that come through. Call to action. So this was an interesting one that came up again in the other day when we were doing the Gruen transfer is, if we are thinking about storytelling as a tool that we want to use to motivate people to action, to engage, then we probably do want to think about, after the person has watched or engaged with this story, what's the next step for them? What do we want them to do? Is it that we just want them to maybe start a conversation? Is it that we want them to actually change behavior, sign up for something, turn up on Sundays to an event? Thinking about what that is and actually embedding that in the story. I always used to see this in crowdfunding, was that, people would have these really inspiring, wonderful videos and you'd be like, how can I get behind that? And then at the end of the story, they wouldn't have the tangible step of what do they actually, now that the audience wants to go on this journey with you, what can they do next? So my advice would be to always have some call to action, even if it's very soft, some way to open up an opportunity for your audience. On the other side of things, I would say, don't have too many calls to action. That's the other thing we always used to see in crowdfunding is, people would have, okay, donate to our campaign and sign up for our newsletter and follow us on social media. And then you have this, overwhelm of choice. So just be very clear with what is the next step for your audience at that point in time. Now we jump over to the right side of our story canvas. And this is where it really starts to get into the creative space. So in terms of people, Alina talked about the importance of human-centered stories. And I do think it's so true that, as humans, we have this yearning to engage and connect with other humans. And it's often when a story is embedded in a human experience that we, we really have the ability to empathize with it. So thinking about who is it that embodies the story that you want to tell? Do they want to share their story? Because if they don't, that's not up to you to decide. And, is this, whose story is this to tell? I think those questions should always be up front when we're talking about people as part of the story. But then I guess the other side of that, which is, I guess, more of the strategic, creative side of things, is thinking about who might your audience connect with, because perhaps they share a mindset that the person in the story once had, or can relate to their, value of family, as it was in Clinton's story. We often talk about with storytelling that oftentimes sharing the story of the converted skeptic is often a powerful story to tell, because they can share their journey from acknowledging why they were skeptical of something and speaking to the realities of that, but then the journey that they went on, that they are now championing something. There was a story of a third generation sugar farmer from the northern New South Wales, Queensland border, who he was being invited to kind of use less fertilizer in his practices. And he was really skeptical at the start, but eventually, after being able to kind of see the yields and the impact that it had on his farm, he became the converted skeptic that then was the champion of that story. And that was obviously so much more effective than, some of the advocates who had been advocating against fertilizer use on that issue. So thinking strategically as well around who might the audience be compelled by and interested in. The other thing we talk about when we talk about people in a story is who is the head, heart, and hands of the story. Now, they may all be one person, but what we mean when we talk about this is the head of the story is often somebody who gives they are the knowing. They give the context of the story. They are able to convey the who, where, what, why, the zoom out bigger picture and how this fits into a systems approach. The hands of the story is often somebody who is working on this issue every day. They can talk to what does this look like in action, what is the approach, and they have that expertise and credibility there. But obviously the heart of the story is usually somebody with lived experience of this story in action. They are the ones who, you know, they are often where the purpose and the values of the story come through. And as I said, sometimes this is all one person. I'd say in Clinton's story, he is the head, heart, and hands of that story. And he actually does touch on the who, where, what, why. He talks about his personal experience, and he also talks about what sober looks like in action and their approach. So he embodies all that in the space of 59 seconds, I think, as well. So be thinking about who the head, heart, and hands of your story is. Now, the other character in our story is obviously place. Place has, you know, always represents something. It has a history, it has a memory. So when we're thinking about, you know, picking up our cameras and filming place, it's not kind of neutral or just the background. It has something to say. So be intentional around how place is used, how it's shown. Even the time of day that you film at can make a difference to what you're saying with the story. Is it, you know, the sunrise and this sense of possibility? Is it the mid-afternoon shade and it's got this sense of, you know, mundane relaxation and invitation to it? Is it gloom? Is it cloudy like it is right now outside for me? And what does that say in your story? Place always has something to say, and we should be conscious around how that is incorporated into our storytelling. And of course, then this folds into style and tone, which again was a really interesting discussion that came up in the Grew and Transfer session, is being, again, intentional around what are we inviting our audience to feel. Now, in digital storytelling, this comes through time of day. We just talked about music is always a big one. So are we going for something that is more kind of rah, rah, inspirational? We can do this all together. We can change the world. Or could that sometimes be off-putting to different audience groups and communities? And is that not the right, most inviting approach? Perhaps we do want to go for something that is a bit more relaxed. It was interesting to note the other day with the Australia Remade story, somebody commented on just the simplicity of the music, simplicity of the editing, simplicity of the pace of it, and how that actually embodied some of the values of the story through the style and tone. Where there was another story that we watched that was kind of more that rapid pace. You know, it kind of felt almost like industrialized, and it was inspiring as well, but it embodied different values. So yeah, being conscious of this. And I always find it really helpful with style and tone to find examples of what I think, oh, like this is kind of what I'm working towards. But equally, I find it helpful to sometimes find examples of like this doesn't sit quite right. It feels a bit sterile, or, you know, and then start to unpick, like, was it the music? Was it the tone of delivery of the storyteller? So that I can think about that consciously with the stories that I'm putting together. So keep that in mind. And just one little strategic thing I wanted to note on with the story canvas is that it's very helpful to think upfront around how is this story actually going to reach the audience. So is it going to be something that's going to be shared on Facebook, or is this for TikTok, or is this, you know, a flyer that has to be dropped, you know, at an event or something like that? What is the actual medium and format through which this story will engage? Because that, knowing that up front and what that is for your audience is obviously better than knowing it later and then realizing, oh, I've shot this video in landscape and actually I'm trying to reach this audience that's only on TikTok, and this style and tone of story is completely wrong for that. So deciding that up front, and therefore then choosing a medium through which to share your story that suits that is really, really important. They're the main things that I wanted to touch on in the story canvas as kind of strategic ways to think through. Would love to know if there's any questions, ideas on perhaps where that have come up for you with your storytelling as we've gone through that. Just checking through the comments there, but Pete, if anything you've noticed as we've gone through that.
I'm just really inspired by all of the new economy stories that I'm seeing people would love to tell, like a hopeful future, joy and connection, regenerative communities, wellbeing economy, relationship with the natural world, First Nations, oral storytelling styles, sustainable fashion, caring, inner well-being and our roles as custodians, protectors. This is so much good stuff in there. So I really love what's showing up here in the chat. And we have a question from Amy about, is there any A-grade examples of academic storytelling that we could share? I mean, one that came to mind was we did a piece with Multicultural New South Wales with Sydney Policy Lab, and that was a really interesting one that had the research problems and results, exactly what you're saying. I'm just going to see if that's out in the wild right now, and if I maybe can share you a link, Amy. So bear with me and I'll see if I can track that down for you.
There's another one also that comes to mind recently. This ANROS, the Australian Network for Research on Women's Safety, were releasing a research report which touched on how young people understand domestic and family violence. And, you know, rather than the report only doing the talking on that, it also was accompanied by a video which was the voice of the young people, you know, telling from their perspective, you know, the key findings of the report, but, you know, in their own words. And so it was kind of coupled together, and there were just some great other pieces of storytelling that they did around the engagement and release of that report, as well as the report itself. So yeah, if Pete, you find that, drop that in the link at the chat as well. And Chris had a question, do we need to engage with TikTok? I hope not, because I'm not. I mean, I think this question always comes back to, you know, who is your audience? Who is the community that you're trying to talk to? And yeah, are they on that platform? So potentially not. I'm definitely just a lurker on TikTok. I'm like, oh, I've got to stay up to date here, but don't actually do anything on there myself. Great question. So we will, yeah, so I do just want to, I guess, cap off this part on thinking about what is your story to tell by just, I guess, reminding of, you know, I think there were some great narrative frameworks that have already been shared in the sessions so far. In Alina's session, there's some great pointers in there. And also Eleanor shared a really great narrative framework there yesterday, so I'm not going to go too far on that, but I think always just reminding ourselves to balance the head, heart and hands in our storytelling. I think often in the space that we work in the impact space, there is a lot of, well, at least I find in the social enterprise space, there's always a lot of heart in the storytelling, which is great. But again, a comment that came up in the Gruen session was, okay, now I'm inspired, but how is this actually going to work? Which I think is where the hands comes into storytelling. Vice versa, I think it's often potentially in the academic world, it's obviously the leaning to, there's often a lot of the head in the storytelling, the logical justification, the arguments, but without balancing that out with, okay, what does this story actually, you know, look and feel like to a human being, being the heart of the story. So keeping, you know, the balance of these things, three things in mind as we tell our stories is super important if we want to engage people to move forward to action and to understanding each other. So I'll cap off the Find Your Story section there. Pete, is there anything else that you wanted to add with Find Your Story? Any other questions that we want to touch on before we get a bit more into the technical aspects?
I just want to emphasize that it's all about, with the Story Canvas tool, it's all about short-circuiting that creative faff time that we tend to have. Like if we think, sometimes we sit down, we go, right, I'm going to spend the next week coming up with my perfect brief. And quite often that week will bleed into 2 weeks or a month or not happen. And so the whole point is that we do that really quickly and then iterate it. So don't try and get it perfect. Get something down really fast, then bounce it with somebody else, like bounce your story idea, see if it's what sticks, what lights people up when you start telling that little ideal narrative in the middle, and then be prepared to, you know, either chuck it out or re-scribble and do it again really quickly. It's an iterative process and you'll get closer and closer. And like I said, the story will then take a life of its own and it will almost write itself.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And yeah, actually reminds me of something that I want to touch on before we start going into the maker story. While with the Story Canvas, we're often talking a lot about like, what's the outcome? What's the piece that we want to see? I think it's a good reminder that actually it's the process of doing the storytelling itself that is actually just as important. Is, you know, we're asking these questions, we're opening up these conversations, you know, we are, you know, we're reaching out to people. And so to not discount that side of things in pursuit of, you know, like, oh, I want to create this short, snappy, really well produced piece that's going to, you know, go viral on social media, you know, sit in the process of doing the storytelling. And, you know, the outcome is, on the other side, is obviously the added cherry on the top as well. So we will go into a bit more of the technical of make your story. So how can we actually use some of the tools that we might have available to us to bring these stories to life in digital mediums? Now I'm going to show a story to start off with. This one was made by two young women named Gab and Meg, and they had a project called Walk So Good, where they wanted to amplify stories of ethical fashion enterprises. And so to do that, they actually walked across Asia for 9 months and visited, you know, ethical fashion enterprises along their way, took their smartphones and told these stories, and, you know, got coverage on BBC World News and Triple J The Hack. And so this was actually a story that they created when they were finished that journey. So it was kind of in the later stages of their digital story. They weren't complete beginners here, but it was filmed on an iPhone 7, I think it was back then. So yeah, and edited on a phone. And I think it's just a great example of what's possible. So I'll just have a little play of this.
The awesome thing about local clothing is that you can be connected to it and it can make an even more meaningful garment. Well, the shawl that I wear, I've gone to that farm, I visited the farmer, I know the name of the alpaca. It's one step up from, I really love this garment, it makes me feel great, to I really love this garment, it reminds me of all these places and people that are really important to me as well. Fibershed Melbourne is an organisation that's been set up to encourage and support local textile systems, really. So we're looking at how your clothing gets grown, processed, to the point that you're wearing it right down to the point that it returns back into the earth as well. How do we make that accessible? How do we make it transparent, but also how do we make it sustainable? Back in the day, Melbourne particularly and Geelong had a very strong textile industry. We were processing our fibres, we were washing them, we were spinning them, and we were making them into fabric right through to finished clothes. I don't think the way in which we did it then is the way in which we're going to do it now. We do still have the skeleton, that old textile industry. We've got these really beautiful natural fibres that we still have. We've got some really interesting things going on in the maker space. How can we build on that in our current context to make these beautiful, local, really grounded textiles for Australians today? Big dream for Fibershed is to have that whole system connected up from farm back to farm, and to have it in a way that is accessible to everyone. Find out more about your clothes, even if it's just looking at your clothes more and remembering the events that you went to while you were wearing them. That is like the most basic form of connection we can all do. And if you're someone with a lot of passion and time in your hands, come volunteer with us and jump down that rabbit hole.
So I think just a great example of what's possible filming on a smartphone. And again, we see a lot of those things that we talked about earlier of, there was the connection between, the farm and then the yarn store in the inner city, and then the store, the ability to bring these three places together. I just think it's the magic of digital storytelling. And even, bringing in the, somewhat historical photos, connecting that past with the present, I think is, just a really interesting way to use these tools to tell stories that aren't necessarily linear. So let's just dissect that a little bit and some of the ingredients in there and how you might actually tell a story. I'll put together a story like that. And this is, I think, kind of like going, so yesterday we kind of, on Wednesday, we kind of analyzed you know, the pieces of media and started to dissect them. And this is that next step of going under the hood of how might, you know, you actually put these together. So when it comes to filming on your smartphone, the first tip that I would give is wipe the lens. I often forget to do this, and I'm often putting my greasy, grubby hands on it. And then when I go to film, it looks like I'm filming with like a potato. It's something that takes like 3 seconds, but makes a world of difference in terms of the quality of your footage. Make use of natural light. Smartphones work really well with natural light. So that means that we want to have the light shining on the face of the person that we are filming, or the subject of whatever we are filming, rather than having them backlit or having a big bright light source behind them. Unless, of course, we're going for that silhouette look, in which case that's your creative license. You can do that. We need to ask the question when we start filming of, are we filming horizontally, holding our phone like this, or are we filming vertically in portrait mode? Now, again, this comes back to the platform question we asked before, because different platforms like videos in different ways. I would say if you're not sure and you just want to start giving stuff a go, by default, go horizontal, because you can always, it's much easier to edit horizontal footage back to being vertical than it is to edit vertical footage to be horizontal. But whatever you do, just stick with it for whatever footage you gather for that particular video. Don't kind of change it up halfway through. Don't use the digital zoom on your phone. So as tempting as it is to, you know, like, oh, I want to get a close up of that and like zoom in like this, actually just walk up closer to whatever you want to film. If we use the digital zoom on our phones, all that does is enlarge the pixels, which doesn't look great when we then play those videos back on bigger screens. It looks kind of pixelated and low quality. So as much as possible, go up and film closer to the subjects that you're filming. There are some phones these days which have kind of more powerful optical zoom on them, like the one that Pete's got there, which is what, is that like an iPhone 13 or something?
It's just an 11, it's got a 2 times, but if I go beyond the 2 times, then it starts to fall apart pretty quick.
Yeah. So keep that in mind. The other things that we really just want to keep in mind when we are filming on our smartphones are around 10 minutes of footage is around a gigabyte of space on our phones. And there's nothing worse than, you know, going to do an interview or, you know, going to film something that's a once in a lifetime event. And then you get that little notification of you've run out of storage space. So keep that in mind. Similarly, filming on your phone chews up battery a lot faster than just using your phone normally. So have that, you know, recharge that charger pack, or, you know, just make sure your phone is juiced up and ready to go. And of course, if you are interviewing somebody or, you know, filming a piece to camera, have your phone on airplane mode or do not disturb. Again, it's like usually the time that my mum will call is once I'm like, oh, okay, great, I'm going to do this interview. And then next minute, I get that alert. So just remember to do that. And then listen to your voicemail later and call mum back later when you remember. Yeah, so there's some basics in terms of gathering better quality footage with our smartphones. Obviously, the other thing you might have noticed with that video is that the audio quality was quite clear and crisp and not a lot of background noise. Now, if you are planning on capturing voice with your stories, then if there's one thing you kind of invest in for this process, I would say an external mic for your phone is a pretty good choice. If you think about our phones, the microphone on them is here, which means that we're always capturing noise from this direction when usually the person we are filming is standing in front of us. A microphone allows us to have the sound be captured right directly from that person. Now, the easiest and probably most accessible version of this would be your headphone mic. Even if you plug that headphone mic in, use the little microphone part of it to, you know, if it was your voiceover, you know, be closer to the source of the speaking. That is already going to get you audio quality that's going to be 150% better than not using a microphone at all. However, if you are kind of ready to take that next step, we can't go past the Rode SmartLav as a microphone. I'm just trying to see if I have one in here. No, but it's the one on the screen. They give you broadcast quality audio. They plug directly into the smartphone, and through most phones, you can just use your normal camera app. and you will get excellent audio quality there. They do have kind of levels above that, like wireless and things like that, but you can do a little research there, and we'll link those in the slides later. Other thing to think about is what's holding your phone. Now, for the most part, if you're wanting and able to, smartphones have some great inbuilt stabilization. So actually, a lot of the time, I myself will be like the tripod or the grip holding the phone. However, when it's just you, sometimes that can be a little tedious, and also, you know, it's pretty hard on the arms. So there are a few other options there. Joby Gorilla Grips are a great, really flexible, adaptable option for something to hold the smartphone. Just make sure you get the smartphone mount with it that clamps onto it and allows that to be used together. We already talked about lighting. So honestly, with smartphones, I rarely use anything beyond like natural light. I would just be really conscious of, if you are filming inside, never film people directly under fluorescent lights. It's not very flattering lighting. Again, unless you're going for that creatively, go for it. But in general, we want to have kind of soft, full light falling on people's faces. If you're outside filming, I generally tend to go for flat shade rather than kind of speckled shade. So just keep those things in mind. Or if you're in a really tight situation, you're like, oh, this is the only chance I'm going to get to interview this person and the lighting's terrible. A second smartphone, as Pete was demonstrating, can sometimes be your best option. Now, in terms of interviews, just wanted to give some quick tips on framing those. And again, these are all just conventions, but sometimes the best creative works are done when the conventions are turned on their head and thrown out the window. So this is just what you'll see in a lot of things, not necessarily that you have to follow. But yeah, in that story and in Clinton's interview as well, you would have noticed that, and I'm just going to demonstrate here in the frame as well, that often we put our interviewees in 1/3 of the frame on the side. Pete's going to demonstrate as well, and feel free to try this along at home, or the other. So kind of framing that off in 1/3. And then with that, you can often imagine in the empty space in the frame, a speech bubble kind of coming out of the mouth of the person talking. And that's kind of how you know that their eye line is in the correct direction in relation to the empty space. Now, I'll just demonstrate. Imagine if I was facing this way in the frame for an interview, where there's no empty space, no room for a speech bubble there. It's quite an awkward, uncomfortable shot. It's not something we conventionally see in a lot of films. Now, there's all these kind of theories as to why the rule of thirds is pleasing to the eye and allows kind of the viewer to feel at ease when they're watching an interview. So, you know, use that knowledge at your own will, whether you want to make an audience feel uncomfortable. But yeah, generally the convention is that we're in 1/3 of the frame with the empty space in the direction of our eye line. Now, other things to be conscious of here is the lens at the same height as the eyes of the person on screen? We don't want to ever have shot
lost
from
your mic.
Oh, have you got me back?
You're back.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that was getting a bit too adventurous there. But yeah, so we don't ever want to kind of shoot from above or from below. Again, unless we're wanting to do it for creative purposes, but often that shot from up above is quite a disempowering shot. It makes people look small in the frame, and therefore that actually plays into how we, how the viewer and how the audience sees them. So we often talk about, yeah, shoot eye level and work that way. Again, with interviews, we talked about this idea before of showing and not just telling. So with backgrounds, think about, you know, often we'll walk into an interview and a client will be like, oh, I've got this great white wall in the office that you can film against. And it's like, no, that's the last thing we want to film against, because, you know, there's so much of the story that can be told through just what's seen. You know, in that story we just watched, there was that beautiful interview shot with the yarns in the background. So before the storyteller even starts talking, we get a sense of what this is going to be about. And that is almost more powerful than often what is said on screen. So keep that in mind. Oh, and just another one, don't try and, or again, use, you know, with intention, not to chop off the top of the person's head, or similarly not to have too much space above the person's head in the frame. I often imagine that they're wearing like a little tiara or like sunglasses on their head, and that's usually about how much room I'll leave at the top of the frame. Again, we don't want to make people look small in the frame. Sometimes you, again, might want to go for a uncomfortably intimate shot with a really, really close up and head chopped off the top there, but that's up to you and your creative, the creative line you're going to take there. So yeah, just a few little tips on filming your interviews. Now, obviously, the other aspect that we had in there is what we refer to as the B-roll and the cutaways. So this is, you know, when she talked about, I know the name of the alpaca, and we saw the alpaca on the screen. I've been to the farm and we saw a shot of the farm. This is all the shots that were not the interview in there. Now, this is really, really powerful. And again, it was so interesting to see this come up in the Gruen transfer the other day, because how what is said is layered with what is shown actually has so much power into the way the story is understood. So, you know, if we talk about a bright future for everyone and we see, you know, a big cityscape with skyscrapers and things like that, and people walking off to work, that tells a very different story. If we, you know, say a bright future for everyone, and we see, you know, a crowd of people, you know, at a beach or in a natural landscape, it's the same words, but just through the choice of shot and pairing that with those words, we tell a very different story. So I think this is something where, you know, traditionally, editing rooms, I'm looking at you, Pete, editing rooms and the way that this has been crafted together has often been hidden behind, you know, the Wizard of Oz's curtain. But now that we all have the power to, you know, many of us have the power to edit with smartphones and gather footage with our smartphones, there's so much more. I think this invites space for more authentic narratives to be told, rather than just those that have been told by those with the power and the resources to do that in the past few hundred years. So yeah, really think about what shots are going to show and not just tell your stories. Can we see people in context? Can we see, you know, objects, scenes, settings that relate to this story? How can we think about symbolism and metaphor when it comes to filming our stories? Now, we often break this down into wide, medium, and close-up shots. Wide shots really often show where a story is happening, and they're kind of shots that are filmed from further away and give kind of a wider lens on the scene. Medium shots, we get a little bit closer into the action. These often show who is there, what are they actually doing, and then close-ups obviously show kind of more details and textures and things like that. I often like to think of these as like a sentence. It's like, okay, we're in this place, this is who's there and what they're doing, and here are some of the feelings, textures, details. And close-ups are always really interesting because we don't look at things close up every day. And so even sometimes the most mundane things can look really interesting when they're filmed in close-up. And I think the other thing here is everybody sees the world in a different way. And, you know, literally capturing that through a lens is just, yeah, really exciting to see how different that can be. I'm sure if I challenged you all to film the same room, you'd all come back with such different stuff. And that also comes down to angle as well. So how can we use angle to help convey something? So the top right-hand corner, if you've got any thoughts actually in the chat, what kind of feeling the shot in the top right-hand corner gives you with that kind of low angle there? So if anyone wants to share in the chat, any words or feelings that this shot here, the low angle shot, kind of brings to mind. I'll just give a moment there if any ideas come through. Okay, expanse. I love that. Elevation when looking up. Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yes, I think they both kind of hit the nail on the head. Intimate. Yes. Wonderful. Great. So yes, so definitely hopeful. Yes. I often think spirituality, uplift, wonderful. Yeah, I think it's kind of like this wisdom, expansiveness, like he's kind of in an elevated position as this kind of figure of leadership and knowledge. Then versus in the bottom left-hand corner, when we're kind of looking over his shoulder at the photo album, what kind of feeling does that give you? Or what kind of words come to mind with that? So this bottom left one, where he's kind of sitting down, yeah, pensive, intimate, scholarly, instructive, wonderful. Carpet, yes, there is a decent carpet space there. Reflective, yes, absolutely. So it gives us this sense that we're kind of sitting next to him on the couch. We have the point of view with that shot of sitting next to him on the couch, and he's kind of showing stuff. It's quite intimate. So yeah, and I mean, again, that's the other thing I love about filming with the smartphones versus when we get the heavy gear out and all the gimbals and all that, is it is so much easier to be creative and experimental with how we film angles, to get up high, to get down low, and film things in an interesting way, and yeah, kind of just show the world something in a different lens. So yeah, just a few shots from the piece that we just watched. Now, just a few other tips I wanted to give there is that there is a lot of great royalty-free content out there that is available kind of free to kind of in the $20 range. Pexels is a really great resource for high definition video and photos. The Noun Project, if you want to kind of get iconography for videos and digital pieces, is a great resource to go to. And then, as we talked about, music can often make such a difference with a piece, with the feeling of it. So Bensound and YouTube Audio Library are kind of great free go-to resources. With all of this, I would always keep in mind with stock resources, always keep in mind who is represented in these, who is not represented, because stock imagery and footage is notoriously bad for actually reflecting the diverse world and community that we find ourselves in. So yeah, I mean, it's great for some stuff. It's not so great for other stuff. So just keep that in mind when you are looking through stock footage and imagery. So we might just do a quick little exercise before we kind of go to the last section of the session. I'll give it 2 minutes. I would just invite you to go and capture 5 seconds of footage from the space around you using some of the tips that we've just talked about, or alternatively find a piece of stock footage that represents your vision for a better future. Now, I'm just remind you of some of the tips that we talked about. So I'll invite you to hold the phone horizontally to film this rather than vertically. Wipe the lens before you start. Get 5 seconds. Consider whether you're getting a wide, medium, or close-up shot of it, and perhaps even get all 3 if you want to be adventurous. And in terms of if you want to do any movement, always less is more when it comes to the smartphone. Think about how you might have to get creative with some symbolism and metaphor there. But yeah, I'll just give you 2 minutes, so to 1:20, to just go and find a 5 seconds of footage from around you, which represents your vision for the future, or go and grab some stock footage. Okay, hopefully if you went and did that, you're coming back to your computer now. I do invite you, if you did gather something, maybe if you, oh, I'm going to turn my video filter off. If you do want to hold it up to the screen and show us what you did come back with, or if you got a bit of stock footage, put it in the chat. I got 5 seconds of footage of a piece of artwork that was up in my room that I think just shows a bit of, I think the, all different faces, I guess I was going for. It also has a very feminine vibe. So it was, you know, wanting to see more women in the inclusive sense led leadership in the future. Ooh, wonderful. That's coming from, is that Nikki? Wonderful. Soil to soul. Interesting. I'm very curious. Oh, wonderful. And Chris got a wonderful shot, looks like on the shelf there of some objects which and artwork. Wonderful stuff.
The chickens there. Awesome.
Oh, love that. Oh my gosh, I feel like I've got a little insight into a few different worlds just through what you've shown there. So thank you. Some very compelling visions for the future there. I'll just take back over the screen share. Thanks for sharing those with us, everyone. I always love seeing a little insight into other worlds there. Now, I am going to finish off with just a little bit on people always ask about, okay, now I know how to gather the footage. How can I actually start editing this together? And I do think that editing is where so much of the power lies traditionally in the digital storytelling process. And so having this kind of opening the black box here is really, really important to me because I think it's just so interesting the way that, you know, the same footage can be interpreted so differently. And again, I think it's so important that those who are living and breathing the story are the ones that have the power and agency to put those stories together. So in terms of editing, essentially, I'll just break it down a little bit. So regardless of if I'm working with 2 months of footage or 2 minutes of footage, I follow the same process that Pete taught me many years ago. Now that process goes like this. It starts with organizing the files. I can't skip that step. Definitely advocate that as step number 1. Then usually if I'm doing this interview B-roll format of video, similar to what we've watched in the stories today, the first thing that I'll do is I'll just listen to the voice in that story. And then it's kind of like sifting for gold in there. I will be cutting out the parts that aren't going to be in the story and just leaving the sound bites or the answers to the interview questions that I do want to be in the story. So it's kind of like sifting down until we get it into that time frame of, you know, whether it's 90 seconds or 3 minutes. And then we have this almost like a monologue from the interviewee with the sound bites that I, as the editor, have chosen to include, and without the ones that I, as the editor, have chosen to exclude. So it's quite a powerful role there. Now, once we have that monologue, that story, that frame, that narrative kind of going on underneath it, then it starts to be about, okay, how am I going to show and not just tell this story? So then I'm listening back to the story and thinking about the cutaways and B-roll that I've got, so that when this person talks about, you know, these people and places that I love, I think, do we have a shot that actually shows these people and places that she loves? When she talks about, you know, the future of the textiles industry, do we have a shot of something that we think represents the future of the textiles industry? And then I'm laying those cutaways over the top of this person talking. So then you start to have this kind of seemingly seamless monologue from the person with these visuals. Then normally the next step is like, it usually feels a little bit awkward and stilted at that point, at which point you add the music. And then you're like, I'm such a great editor. This story just flows. Music honestly does make such a difference. So if you are in this creative process and you're kind of writing yourself off as a terrible editor, at least hold it out until you put the music on, and then you can kind of reevaluate. Then usually we look at kind of titles and transitions as kind of polishing steps, you know, little things that might say people's names and roles and things like that. And the last step of exporting. So exporting it out of the editing program, turning it into like a file that would be uploaded to, you know, whatever platform it's going on to, YouTube, Vimeo, and things like that. So that's what the editing process looks like in a nutshell. I'm going to go a little bit further into it. If you're feeling a bit overwhelmed by the technical side of it, just tune me out for the next like 2 minutes or so, and then I'll kind of come back to some program recommendations. I'm not going to go exactly into how to cut and things like that, but I do think it's important to kind of go a little bit further into this because regardless of what platform I'm working on, it follows a pretty similar flow. So I'm just going to get a program open from my side. While I give it some time to do that in the background, I will actually go into the, oh no, here it goes. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. So this program that we're looking at is called Filmora Wondershare. We've tried so many editing softwares out in our workshops over the years and tried to land on ones that we teach that are the best balance between usability and user friendliness, but also ability to deliver a solid product. And Filmora Wondershare is one that constantly, I'm so pleased with how much people in the workshops love it and continue to use it. So essentially what we have down here, I'm just going to kind of do a bit of a deconstruction of the edit process and that process that we just talked about. So what we start off with is we start off with this interview that we cut, and then we're left with sound bites. Now these bits of footage and this edit actually comes from Mukhtar, who you'll meet in the video in a second, who was in a workshop a few years ago and who has let me use this as a demonstration edit. So this is what it looks like at step one when we just have that interview.
My name is Mukhtar Ahmed Mohammed, aka Mukhtar Noor. I'm a photographer, videographer, YouTuber based in Garo at the moment, Somalia. And right now I'm participating in UNDP Storytelling Bootcamp. I always wanted to learn about storytelling because there are so many stories to tell about Somalia. Most of the time we see on the TV, on the news, we see the negative images about Somalia, the piracy, the terrorism, but they don't concentrate on the positive side, and there are so many inspiring stories to cover. So I feel like I have access to such stories that might uplift the people, motivate them. That's why I love to learn about this skill, so that I go on the field and then bring to the world amazing stories about Somali people.
Okay, so you get a sense for this is that first step of just finding the sound bites that Mukhtar wanted to keep in his story. Now we take it to that next step of how do we show and not just tell this story. So let's have a look at the cutaways and the B-roll that Mukhtar put on this story. So let's play it back as it would look in that second step.
My name is Mukhtar Ahmed Mohammed, aka Mukhtar Noor. I'm a photographer, videographer, YouTuber based in Garo at the moment, Somalia. And right now I'm participating in UNDP Storytelling Bootcamp. I always wanted to learn about storytelling because there are so many stories to tell about Somalia. Most of the time we see on the TV, on the news, we see the negative images about Somalia, the piracy, the terrorism, but they don't concentrate on the positive side, and there are so many inspiring stories to cover. So I feel like I have access to such stories that might uplift the people, motivate them. That's why I love to learn about this skill, so that I go on the field and then bring to the world amazing stories about Somali people. Like every day when I go out and bring my camera with me, I see something new. I see hope, I see new construction. Instead of the sounds of the gunshots, there is a sounds of constructions. And that shows you that how resilient the Somalis are and how they are surviving even more, and they want to live better life. So it's really motivates me, and this is the reason why I live in Somalia, and I love my culture, I love my people. This is why I want to be here for the rest of my life.
Okay, so obviously makes a huge difference at that next step when Mukhtar is able to show these little bits of his world. What does, a positive and inspiring future for Somalia look like that's what it looks like for Mukhtar. Then obviously, as I said, the next step, and I'll just do a quick demonstration of this, is adding the music. So we'll just have a little look at how much of a difference this makes.
Ahmed Mohammed, aka Mukhtar Noor. I'm a photographer, videographer, YouTuber based in Garo at the moment, Somalia. And right now I'm participating in UNDP Storytelling Bootcamp.
Okay, so hopefully that gives you a little bit of sense of the way the ingredients that we've looked at so far really come together to form a little story, and how all those little choices in there around the shots that are gathered, you know, what are the key messages that are going to come through, what's the style and tone, actually, you know, form this story that then we, you know, frames the way that it's showed to the world. So as I said, I'm not going to go into the technical aspects of editing, but in terms of editing programs, as I said, Filmora Wondershare is a great option for working on computers and laptops. If you're more interested in editing on a phone, KineMaster is available free. It has a tiny little watermark on it. It's on Android and iOS, very similar to Filmora Wondershare and very similar functionality. Otherwise, there is also a great program called Lumen 5, which kind of uses artificial intelligence actually to put together videos. So if you kind of have existing blogs, pieces that you're writing, it's really actually easy to start to turn them into videos using Lumen 5. But yeah, I'll put the links in the slides that go out so you can kind of have a little play with them. There's plenty of kind of videos and tutorials around for that. But yeah, I will start wrapping up, but I did want to come back to that question of, you know, how can we create a process of storytelling or live and breathe the process of storytelling that is actually the values that we want to see in the world in action. And I think it's a good question to always remind ourselves of, because I even think about, you know, the terminology that we use, you know, that we use when we talk about filmmaking and storytelling is often about, and I've caught myself using it today, is like, how can I capture this shot? You know, even the word shot is, you know, it's this extractive style of storytelling. So how can we perhaps make this not just about how can we be going out and extracting stories and using them for our purposes, but how can we be sharing these tools, creating these spaces where all different stories can be told. And I know that's what is on the cards in, you know, I've heard over the last few days that is the intention with the NENA space, is to create a space where, you know, different visions of what the new economy looks like can be shared and heard. So yeah, just thinking about how can we think about this process differently to the way that it's been done in, you know, the past kind of 200 or so years, and do something that is actually, you know, us living and breathing the values that we want to see in the world in terms of the way we do stories. And so that does mean not just storytelling, but story listening, and what we like to refer to as digital storytellers as story weaving, is then looking at these fields of stories and thinking about, okay, what is similar, what is different, and celebrating that. What are the themes that come through in this, and what does this mean? What wisdom does this give us about the communities that we're a part of? Whose voices are being heard and whose aren't being heard, and how do we, you know, ensure that this is a, you know, a process that embodies equity and justice. So just want to really frame these tools in that way. And yeah, I can't wait to see the stories that you tell and the little insights into your world and your visions for the future, and those around you and the communities and the people around you that hopefully we get to see using some of these tools and others that you're probably connected to as well. So I will leave it off there and we can open for any questions. Thank you all so much for being a part of this. We are Digital Storytellers. We're on social media. We do have a Facebook group for, you know, a community of practice of storytelling if you do have technical questions, but I'm sure we'll be in touch through the NENA network in the near future as well. But yeah, I will open it up for questions, comments, but we'll leave off with the content there.
Can I just say a huge thank you? That was beyond fantastic. It was just so excellent to have all that information and the technical stuff, and Pete's pouring all those free sites into the chat. It's just been amazing. I know that there will be questions and I'll let Pete handle them, but Can I just ask, as someone involved in NENA, how many folks do you need to run a very specific workshop? Because what we would love to do as a building off from this workshop and the end of NENA Narratives Week is really start to encourage people in the NENA network to come and do a bit more work with yourself. I see Alana Marsh, thankfully, is still on here. She runs amazing processes as well. We want to get all of our members access to great folks like yourselves. How many people do you need for a course, and how long do they go for if we were to build a NENA group?
Yeah, I mean, we do everything from, short stuff like this to when we really take people through a journey, it's usually like a 6-week one, you have one touch point a week in terms of like a webinar, and then you have kind of some tools that you kind of can go through in your own time. And then at the end of that, that's when we're going on a journey to creating stories together that then, can be released into the world at the end of it. So, and I mean, a group size like this is always wonderful, because I feel like it's like kind of that 15 to 20 is a good balance of, enough people that we've got like different energies and stories going on, but we also want to give space for people there. And I think Alana's talking there as well.
Sorry, can't quite hear you, Natasha.
Oh, sorry. So that's kind of the group size and weeks that we generally look at in terms of a journey. So yeah, happy to share more on that and figure out how we can, just seeing a little glimpse of the stories that people have shared in the chat, how we can bring some of those to life.
Excellent, thank you. I won't ask any more, but just as one of the co-hosts, say to the audience, if you're part of NENA, and if you're not, please join. But if you're part of NENA, shoot us a note. Tell us we want to know more. We want to do more. I'd like to be part of a class. Then we can construct a very special class for our folks to be telling stories that we can then show on the NENA website. You can use in your own work, etc., etc. Chris, did you have anything to add to that before I stop talking?
No, I think that's good. One thing I'm curious about is we've focused a lot, and you at Digital Storytellers seem to focus a lot on telling stories through the format of video. Is that because you think that that's the best way to tell these stories, or is it just that it's where you've chosen to focus, but we could use similar techniques in other formats as well? Just something I'm curious about, because I've played a little bit with using the story canvas to design stories to tell or to write, and it works pretty well. You just have to think a little bit differently about boxes like people and places and how you're going to evoke place when you can't actually show it. But just be interested in your thoughts on that.
I mean, for me, I definitely think, in terms of the story canvas, and I think some of the more, story structure frameworks we work with, that they are really applicable, regardless of medium. And I think that's why it's also so important to ask that campaign question up the front, because sometimes video isn't going to be right. I feel like it really always comes down to who your audience and what the purpose of sharing your story is. I think the thing that I do think that is great about video in terms of like going on a storytelling journey is that it's a good way to practice all of those different threads of thinking about, yes, the messaging, but also visually, what does this look like? But then what's the feeling of it as well? So that then, you have a sense like you've kind of gone through that journey, and you can apply that to other mediums. But yeah, we've definitely worked with other formats in the past, where it is kind of more like photo and text and things like that. But I just find video to be so immersive and all encompassing, and almost like the next best thing. It's never going to be equal to sitting across from somebody and, having a conversation, but it's almost like the next best thing sometimes.
I would add that almost everything's a story. Like even our session today is kind of like a little bit of a story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. You're thinking about how things flow. If you're running an event, you're thinking about people when they arrive, and then when they leave, how you would like them to feel when they leave. And so I often use the story canvas for, all sorts of stuff like events or, and a story, like a photograph, like on an iPhone, like when you go back through those, you find them quite handy to share an experience, and that experience is an artifact that you can then relate with someone with. And for me, stories really help us do that. They're like little threads that we can sew together. It's not so much about the video and the format as much as it is about an artifact that we can share. It's a cultural artifact that then is a reflection. It's a geo-time locator, but it's more than that. It's a sparking of insight and just a share point that we can embark on a deeper journey together, individually and potentially scalable to hugely meta collectively, and which is what it becomes quite exciting. And I think with NENA doing NENA Storytellers, with the regen networks, with all of our collective passions and visions, we can do some incredible stuff. And it doesn't have to be film, it can be podcasts, it can be and one other thing I'll mention is what I love personally about doing the film side of things is creating one short 3-minute film. We quite often will go and film a lot of interviews that can be 30 or 40 minutes. Each one of those interviews can be its own standalone, full conversation or a podcast. The imagery that comes with that film becomes a whole lot of stills and photos. You can write over those photos and do all sorts of like social shareable things. So one project can create a whole library of materials that you can always go back to and use again in different ways and take little bits here and recombine them. So the story keeps evolving and emerging as we roll forward and new things come up. The stories never end.
Agreed. Well, if there are no other questions, happy to stick around, but we might put a formal end to the webinar here so that those who want to jump off can jump off, and then anyone who does want to stick around with questions can. So thank you so much for having us. It's been so wonderful to participate, not just today, but to listen in throughout the week. As I said at the start, I've been so inspired by everything that everybody's been sharing, and so grateful to NENA for hosting this week. It's been really, really cool. So thank you all for attending today. And bringing your energy virtually and your participation. And thanks to Michelle and Chris for hosting. It's been really wonderful.
Thank you. And can I say a special thank you to Natasha, who hasn't been feeling very well. You've done a brilliant job. No one would know, but I am very grateful to you for someone who's been feeling a bit sick to join us with so much energy. Thank you so much. And Pete, it's always a pleasure. Fabulous. And we will be in touch, and and everyone in our NENA hub and everyone on this call today or listening on recordings, please know that this is the beginning, not the end of our NENA narratives journey. A huge thank you to Mr. Chris Reedy for really being, he doesn't like this word, but being our expert in the narrative space. It's something I've wanted to build, but absolutely am a novice in the ways of knowing and doing. And Chris has really been the backbone for holding this week and bringing the good people together. So a huge acknowledgement and thank you to Mr. Reedy and everyone else on this call who's been part of the NENA hub. I won't mention you because if I miss someone out, then I'll feel bad. So thank you heaps. You know who you are. And Natasha and Pete, you're legends. All this freely accessible info is a gift. And if folks want to stay on or ask a question, maybe make it quick just because Natasha's been unwell. I'm going to stop the recording in a moment. I'm just very aware of our fellow human beings and their needs. But look, thank you heaps. I officially close the NENA Narratives Week. It's been an absolute ball, and I can't wait to start generating some stories. That would be grand. Chris, would you like the final word?
Oh, sure. Well, thank you. I just want to add my thanks to Natasha and Pete. That was awesome. And so many things to dig into there. And really, I just want to say it's been great. All the speakers we've had this week, and really the engagement from everyone who's come along as well has been really inspiring. That the chat has just been alive and energetic, and I think it gives me a lot of hope that we can weave some lovely stories and narratives together. So looking forward to the next steps. And my thanks to Michelle for being my co-conspirator all along the way and cooking up the program. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. See you soon.